Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some more fascinating ideas. Today, we're tackling great decisions. You know, those tough calls where the right answer isn't always clear-cut,
Oh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
for sure. You know, we were talking about Mean Joe Jay before the show,
That's right.
and it's a book all about navigating those tricky choices.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, some of these scenarios are real nail-biters. So, what makes these great decisions so different from those typical right or wrong choices we're used to?
Well, it's funny how we're often taught there's like a clear right and wrong way to do things.
Right?
But the reality is, life is messy, especially in the business world. These gray decisions often involve competing priorities,
Uh-huh.
ethical dilemmas, external pressures, all these factors that just muddy the waters.
Yeah, for sure. And the book has this really interesting hypothetical scenario with a CEO of a biogenetics company facing a crisis.
Exactly.
So, can you set the scene for me? What kind of crisis are we talking about here?
Okay, so imagine this. A groundbreaking new drug, years of research and development, successful clinical trials, investors are ecstatic.
Okay.
The company's stock is soaring, everything's looking amazing.
Sounds like a dream sound true.
Right. But then suddenly, two patients who received the drug develop a rare and fatal brain infection.
Oh, wow. That's a nightmare. So what does the CEO do? Does he halt everything, risk losing millions? Or does he investigate further but potentially put more patients at risk?
Exactly. And that's a classic gray decision right
Mm,
there. There's no easy answer, no clear-cut right or wrong path. Every choice has significant consequences.
a lot of pressure. I can't even imagine. So the book calls these gray decisions because, well, they're not easily categorized as right or wrong.
Right.
How do we even begin to tackle them?
That's the big question.
More to it than just going with your gut, I'm guessing.
Definitely. And one of the big pitfalls the book highlights is overconfidence. It's that sneaky tendency to think we're better than average, that we can beat the odds, even when maybe all the evidence suggests otherwise.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. Sometimes my gut leads me straight into a wall. Didn't the book use a story about a textile factory owner to illustrate this?
Yes, the owner faces a devastating fire at his factory,
Okay.
and he decides to rebuild, even continuing to pay his workers during the reconstruction. And this move earned him a ton of praise, accolades, even a spot at President Clinton's State of the Union address.
Wow. Sounds like a truly noble decision. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, he was driven by his good intentions, maybe even a bit of a hero complex, but he failed to consider some crucial factors.
Like what?
Like the state of the textile industry at the time, it was actually in decline,
Oh,
and ultimately the factory ended up going bankrupt.
wow, that's a tough lesson. It really shows that even with the best intentions, you need to look beyond the surface and consider all angles. What does the book suggest we can do to sort of overcome this overconfidence bias?
They offer a few practical tools. One of them is what they call the decision tree.
Okay,
Instead of jumping on your first idea, they recommend listing out all possible solutions,
got it.
even the ones that seem crazy at first.
Okay.
Then, carefully analyze the potential consequences of each option, gathering all the information you can to support your analysis.
So taking a step back, really thinking things through, rather than just going with your initial instinct.
Exactly. And had the factory owner used this approach, he might have realized that rebuilding in a declining industry was, incredibly risky. And maybe he could have explored alternatives like investing in new products or maybe offering his employees generous severance packages, something to help them transition to new careers.
Right. It's all about having a system in place to challenge our own assumptions so we're not blinded by that initial vision.
Exactly.
Is there anything else we can do to sort of avoid falling into that overconfidence trap?
Yeah, they also recommend assembling what they call a grade decision expert group, a group of trusted individuals who can offer diverse perspectives and have experience handling these kinds of complex situations.
So it's like having a built-in devil's advocate to keep you grounded. I love that. But let's be honest, sometimes, even with all the advice in the world, making these tough calls can feel impossible. What's the next big idea the book offers to help us navigate these gray areas?
Well, this one might surprise you. Focusing solely on outcomes can actually backfire.
Really, outcomes seem like the most important thing to focus on, especially in business. What else is there?
The book argues that there are actually three key dimensions to consider.
Okay.
Outcomes, which are like the results of our decision, obligations, which are moral and ethical responsibilities,
Uh-huh.
and then humanity, which encompasses the human element, the impact our decisions have on individuals and relationships.
So it's not just about achieving those great results, but also considering the ethical implications and how our decisions impact people.
Precisely. The book uses a classic thought experiment called the trolley problem to illustrate this. Have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Remind me.
Okay, so you're faced with a choice:
Okay.
do nothing and let 5 people die, or pull a lever to divert the trolley, saving those 5 people, but killing one person in the RSS.
Oh, man. That's a tough one. On the surface, saving 5 lives seems like the obvious choice. But taking a life, even to save others, feels morally wrong.
Exactly, and it highlights the tension between maximizing benefits and adhering to our moral principles. And the book takes it a step further with another question.
Oh, no.
Would you willingly donate your organs to save 6 strangers?
Hmm. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay, well, would you, as a doctor, take the organs from a healthy patient without their consent to save those 6 people?
Absolutely not. That just seems so wrong.
Right, it's a clear violation, and while saving lives is a positive outcome, violating someone's rights is a breach of our moral obligation.
Right.
We can't just focus on the ends, the means matter too.
It makes you think about those real-life cases where companies put profits ahead of people. It's scary. How does this three-dimensional decision-making play out in a more everyday situation?
They give an example of a manager struggling with a longtime employee who's no longer performing well. And there are a few ways to approach this.
Okay.
A results-focused manager might simply fire the employee to optimize performance.
Makes sense.
An obligation-focused manager might prioritize a compassionate conversation and offer a generous severance package.
Okay.
And then a humanity-focused manager might try to understand the reasons for the decline and explore alternative solutions, like retraining or finding a different role within the company.
So it's about considering the whole picture. The outcomes, the ethical obligations, and the human impact.
Exactly. It's about finding the most balanced and ethical decision, rather than just focusing on one single dimension.
I love this. It's a framework I could definitely see myself using in my own life. So we've talked about overconfidence and the three dimensions of decision-making. What's the third key idea from the book for navigating these gray areas?
Well, this one might sound a bit paradoxical. Doing the right thing can be tricky.
Wait, how can doing the right thing be tricky? I'm intrigued.
It's not that doing the right thing is bad. It's more that our idea of what's right might clash with like workplace politics or social pressures.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see how this could get complicated. Does the book give any examples of this?
Yes, they share a case study about a young manager named Becky
Okay,
who faces this exact dilemma.
okay.
One of her team members, who got the job through connections,
Oh, no.
is consistently underperforming
Okay.
and disrupting the team's workflow.
Oh, I've been there. What a tough spot to be in. If you follow the rules, do the right thing, you risk upsetting some very powerful people. But if you ignore it, the team suffers, and your own integrity takes a hit. What did Becky do?
Well, she chose to address the issue head-on,
Really?
giving honest feedback and eventually deciding to let the employee go.
Wow, that's a bold move. I admire her courage. But I can only imagine how that went over with her superiors.
You're right, she faced criticism from senior management for her decision,
Ugh, figures.
highlighting that sometimes doing what we believe is morally and professionally right can lead to conflict, especially when it challenges those existing power structures or those unspoken rules.
So frustrating. It feels like a no-win situation. You do the right thing and get punished, but if you don't, you compromise your values. So how do we deal with those situations where doing what we think is right could backfire?
The book stresses that it's not about abandoning our principles or just caving to pressure.
Okay.
It's about being strategic and adaptable in our approach.
So it's not about being rigid, but finding a way to uphold your values while working within the system. Did Becky find a way to do that?
She did. She recognized that directly confronting senior management might not be the best approach, so she took a more nuanced route.
Okay, I'm really curious now. What did she do?
She spoke privately with that underperforming employee
Okay.
and helped him see that he wasn't thriving in this particular role,
Okay.
and then offered support and guidance in finding a more suitable position elsewhere.
Oh, that's brilliant. So she managed to uphold her values, support her employee, and avoid a huge conflict.
It was a win-win. The employee found a role where he could succeed, the team's performance improved, and Becky showed real leadership skills without rocking the boat.
That's such a good lesson. Doing the right thing isn't always about following some strict set of rules. Sometimes it's about being flexible, creative, and willing to find solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. And it often involves really understanding the people involved, the organization's dynamics, and the potential consequences of our actions.
This is making me think about that biogenetics CEO we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Remember? He's dealing with that potentially life-saving drug that's also causing those fatal brain infections.
Right.
Talk about a tough choice. How did he handle that situation? Did he find a way to balance those competing interests and make the quote-unquote right decision?
That's what we'll dive into in part 2.
Can't wait. This is getting good. Welcome back to our deep dive into great decisions. So we left off with Jim, the CEO, facing that impossible choice with the drug.
Right, the potential to save lives, but also the risk of fatal complications really puts that whole gray decision thing into perspective, huh?
For sure. So how did he handle all that pressure? Did he just cave and think about the potential financial losses?
You know, it's interesting. He actually demonstrated a remarkable ability to stay calm and collected under pressure. Didn't just jump into a decision.
That's good.
Instead, he stepped back, recognized his own biases might be clouding his judgment.
Smart move. It's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of a breakthrough drug or the fear of, negative consequences.
Exactly. And he knew this was a big one, needed a well-informed decision. So he sought out expert opinions from within the company, even from outside specialists.
Okay, so he was getting a wider perspective, not just assuming he had all the answers.
Right. And he also involved the FDA really early on, recognized the importance of transparency, regulatory oversight,
That makes sense.
understood this wasn't just a business decision, it was a public health issue.
He's taking it seriously, not just thinking about profits.
Absolutely. So after carefully considering all that information, all those different perspectives, he made the tough call.
What did he do?
Suspended distribution of the drug while they investigated further.
Wow. I bet that wasn't easy, with so much riding on this new drug.
Not at all. They'd invested a ton into the drug's development, production. There was a risk of huge financial losses, not to mention the hit to the company's reputation.
Yeah, that's a lot to consider, but it sounds like he ultimately put patient safety above all else.
Yeah, he understood the potential benefits, but the risk of those complications couldn't be ignored.
A good example of balancing those competing interests we talked about. Finding a solution that considered everyone.
Exactly. Jim was really striving for that balance, addressing the safety concerns, but also thinking about the company's future, the investors. It was a tough spot.
It's a real testament to his leadership, I think. Not just chasing success, but making those tough choices that align with his values.
I agree. So suspending distribution was a big step. Did they figure out what was causing the brain infections? Were they able to make the drug safe?
Yeah, what happened?
Well, this is where the whole gray decision complexity really kicks in. It's rarely a simple fix.
Right.
They did identify a specific genetic marker. It seemed certain patients were more susceptible to the infection.
Oh, okay, so they were getting somewhere. Did that allow them to make the drug safe for everyone?
They were able to modify the drug, yeah. And they put stricter screening procedures in place, minimized the risk as much as possible.
But there's always some risk with any medical treatment, right?
Always. And even with the precautions, there were still some tragic cases.
Oh no, so even with Jim doing everything he could, things still went wrong.
It's a reminder, in these gray areas, there isn't always a perfect solution.
That must have been so hard for Jim to know he made what he thought was the best choice, but people still suffer.
Absolutely. But leadership isn't about finding the easy answers. It's about those tough situations, the calls you make, even when you know there might be difficult consequences.
Yeah, it makes you realize sometimes you just have to choose the option that causes the least harm, even if it's not perfect.
Exactly. And it takes being willing to acknowledge your limitations, to keep learning and adapting, and to accept that even our best efforts might not prevent all negative outcomes.
It's heavy stuff. Really makes you think. So what's the main takeaway here from this whole situation with the drug?
I think it brings up a question that goes beyond just this one case. Is it ever okay to weigh the benefits of a treatment, even a life-saving one, against the risks, even fatal ones?
Wow, that's a question we all have to grapple with. Not just in business, but in our personal lives, too. Tough choices everywhere.
It's a good reminder that our choices have real impact. And sometimes, even when we try our best, the consequences are hard to bear.
Definitely. This whole conversation's been so insightful. We've talked about overconfidence, the different dimensions of a problem, and the weight of those tough voices.
And we saw how all of that comes together in a real-world situation with both the good and the bad outcomes.
Exactly. But we still have one more key idea from the book to unpack.
We do.
That idea that doing the right thing can be tricky. I'm ready to hear more of Becky's story, how that all plays out.
That's where we'll pick up in part 3.
We're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive on great decisions. And we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. From recognizing our own biases to understanding there's not always a perfect solution.
Definitely a lot to think about. But, we left off on that idea that doing the right thing can sometimes backfire.
Right, right. And Becky's story really illustrates that, remember?
Yeah, she's the manager dealing with that underperforming employee, the one with connections high up. It's a tough spot.
Definitely. Torn between following procedures, potentially causing a stir, and just letting things slide.
What did she end up doing? Did she just give in and let the problem continue?
No, she actually decided to tackle it head on. gave the employee honest feedback, eventually let him go.
Wow. She's got guts. But I bet that didn't go over well with her bosses.
It didn't. She got criticized for her decision, shows how doing what we think is right can cause friction, especially when it upsets the power dynamics.
Ugh, that's so frustrating. You get penalized for doing the right thing, but if you don't, you compromise your values. So how do you deal with that when doing what you think is right could backfire?
The book doesn't say to abandon your principles or just cave in. It's about being strategic, adaptable.
So not being rigid, but finding a way to stay true to your values while still working within the system. Did Becky manage to pull that off?
She did realize that a direct confrontation with senior management might not work, so she took a different approach.
Okay, I'm all ears. What did she do?
Talked to the employee privately, helped him see that he wasn't thriving in that role,
Okay,
and then she offered support in finding a better position somewhere else.
that's smart. She supported her employee, upheld her values, and avoided a big conflict. Everyone wins.
Exactly. Employee found a place to succeed, team performance improved, and Becky showed strong leadership without causing a stir.
That's a great lesson. Sometimes doing the right thing is about being flexible, creative, finding what works for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Requires understanding the people, the dynamics, the potential consequences of each action.
This deep dive has been so valuable. We talked about biases, looking at the whole problem, and being smart about doing the right thing.
Lots of tools and perspectives to help us make better decisions, even in tough situations.
So for our listeners, what's the one key takeaway from all this?
I'd say, remember, gray areas are rarely about finding the perfect solution. It's about making the best choice you can in a messy situation and being willing to learn as you go.
Well said. And sometimes it's about finding that win-win, like Becky did. Thanks for all the insights today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. We all face these gray areas. These conversations help us learn from each other.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another exploration of fascinating ideas.